Hello and welcome. My name is Eva Iwaszuk and I represent Ecologic Institute and the Interlace project. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you at this COP26 side event co-organized by the Glasgow City Council, Ecologic Institute, Social Climate and FIDIC, as well as the Interlace, Connexus and Connecting Nature Horizon 2022 projects. Today, we'll discuss how can we bring more nature to cities and to urban areas in order to address the twin challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. To answer this question, we have with us a truly fantastic set of speakers, representatives of local governments, international policy experts, and social entrepreneurs who represent a variety of perspectives from different sectors. Without further ado, I will pass the mic to Sandra Naumann, the coordinator of the Interlace project, followed by Sean Vincent-Kelly from the Glasgow City Council for the opening remarks. Sandra, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eva, for the introduction. Well, I think the session titled Nature for Climate and Biodiversity in Cities is a topic that at a first glance you might not expect to see at a climate COP. But it's really great to see that this COP seeks to protect and restore ecosystems as part of its goals. And why is it so important? So, well, today we face several challenges, as we know, including the climate crisis, which we already experiences through increasing droughts and temperatures, as well as floods and other catastrophic events. And we also have to cope with a severe biodiversity crisis. Alone in Europe, only 15% of the protected areas have a good conservation status, while the vast majority have a poor or bad conservation status. And I think both crises are more interconnected as we may think, and it can be very scary, to be honest, thinking about the long-term consequences of those for us and our future generations. But as we have learned from history, every crisis can also be an opportunity for real change and the creation of something new for a better and more sustainable future. And a key component in this picture are our natural resources, our nature, our ecosystem, because this is the basis for our human well-being and health. And with this session, to get a better understanding what this means at local level, we will look in the session at the most densely populated areas, which are our cities. And these urban spaces are constantly confronted with those challenges, such as climate change, but also pollution and urban sprawl. And this results in an exacerbated degradation of natural ecosystems and also then jeopardizing ecosystem service provisioning for human health, biodiversity, social equity, and also city resilience. So bringing more nature into a city by implementing so-called nature-based solutions can be one key tool to tackle the recovery of our degraded, damaged, and destroyed ecosystems. And there with those solutions, those nature-based solutions, they have the potential to contribute to climate change mitigation, adaptation, but also biodiversity protection, and provide us also with co-benefits. So with this session, we really want to raise awareness on the multifunctionality of nature-based solutions in cities, but also to highlight a variety of perspectives on the key challenges, opportunities, and pathways to mainstream urban nature-based solutions and boost local economies worldwide. Because we have some work to do if we want to achieve this. So it's not an easy road to go. So how do we bring more nature to cities to achieve climate and biodiversity goals? At this point, I would like to hand over to Sean Kelly from Glasgow City Council with the question, what are the key processes and the challenges to untap the potential of nature-based solutions, what we will discuss today?
Thank you, Sandra. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Vincent-Kelly, and I'm an urban planner and a senior project officer in the Connecting Nature project based in the front-runner city, Glasgow. So a big welcome from a crisp and sunny COP26 host city, Glasgow. And on behalf of the organising team, we're very happy that you can all join us today for what is sure to be a really interesting and varied session. In Glasgow, we are working to produce a delivery plan for our open space strategy, which is taking a nature-based solutions approach using a nature-based solution framework developed by the Connected Nature team. This session revolves around the role of urban nature-based solutions today to address climate and biodiversity crisis, create quality green jobs and bring about holistic well-being. It's jointly organised by the Ecological Institute, representatives of 3 Horizon 2020 consortia, including Interlace, Connected, and us here in the Connected Nature team, as well as International Federation of Consulting Engineers and Malaga-based Social Climate. We have a packed session today. We will first hear from our cities, entrepreneurs and engineers before a panel discussion with representatives of local governments and international institutions. But before we introduce our first speakers, who I understand actually is going to be the wonderful nature-based entrepreneur Ellie Steele and her colleague Felicity, who recently took part in the Scotland's first nature-based accelerator programme, which was led by Connected Nature. I just wanted to briefly provide an update on a recent and very relevant consultation that took place on a nature-based economy white paper produced by my colleagues at Connected Nature. The draft white paper asked a key question: how can we triple public and private sector investment in nature-based solutions by 2030, building sustainable jobs and enterprises in the nature-based economy? Well, the consultation is now closed with over 150 responses from all around the globe. And following this, we're now expecting an important European Commission expert publication on the nature-based economy, which will be coming out in the next few months. The role of nature-based enterprises in delivering the nature-based economy will be a key element of the report, which will feature the work being done by cities like Glasgow and others across Europe and the world. So this is an important one to watch for. Keep an eye out for it. And I'm hoping that some of my colleagues will be sharing some links for more information in the chat at the moment. But that's it for me. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the session. And now over to my colleague, Ewa Ashok. Thanks, Ewa.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you, Sandra, for setting the stage for the event today. And I'm sure that the audience is just as excited as me for the first segment of our event today, which are the presentations of public and private sector practitioners who will showcase specific examples of work being done across Europe and the world to actually bring more nature into urban areas. And first of all, it is my pleasure to introduce Elle Steele and Felicity Steers, the founders of a nature-based enterprise, Flores. Please, Elle and Felicity, the floor is yours.
Hi there. We're here representing the Flores Halo Garden project. I'm Felicity Steers. I'm a landscape architect and I'm a director at ERTS, which is a Glasgow-based design practice. We're right here in Glasgow, in the heart of the Merchant City.
My name is Ellie Steele and I am the project manager for the Halo Gardens project. Next slide, please. Just go.
Halo Gardens were the result of a research project at ERTS during the 2020 lockdown. Basically, they are biodiverse micro gardens. They're little tiny spaces that are big enough for 2 to 4 people to sit in at social distance. And the idea is that they turn the horrible idea of social distance into a pleasurable outdoor event. So we're turning the idea of social distancing on its head through a nature-based solution. We design in collaboration with communities and we use plants to express human ideas and experiences and stories. So for example, ginkgo is a symbol of world unity because it grows right across the globe. Jasmine is often used to symbolize love, forget-me-nots for remembrance, and so on.
Slide, please. The first major boost to the Halo. Oh, that's in the wrong order.
Oh,
sorry.
Well, we've been working with the National Health Service this year to get the project started, and so far we've developed 2 prototypes that have gone in at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So next slide, please. Here you can see one of the very first ones before it's even finished, inhabited by staff from the hospital out there eating their lunch, and the gravel hasn't even gone down and the plants haven't been planted. So this really shows you how much they're needed. Our first proper Halo Garden is nearing completion in Paisley at the Royal Alexandra Hospital, where we've been working with the intensive care unit and hospital volunteers. And this process is going to allow ICU patients to go outdoors during their treatment and will allow COVID patients to see their families in a safe condition.
Next slide, please. So for the first major boost to the project was our acceptance on the nature-based accelerator pilot run this year by Glasgow City Council in conjunction with Good Ideas. The 12-week programme introduced us to the value proposition canvas, helped us to design our pitch, and gave us the opportunity to join a varied cohort with similar ethics and ideals. We were also introduced to nature-based enterprises already running locally and nationally. The real strength of the programme lies in the cohort, the sharing of ideas, knowledge and experience pooled, and confidence gained from peer review is invaluable. Our product completely evolved over the course of the programme. Next slide, please. Halo Gardens are an example of urban acupuncture, using inexpensive but high reward methods to create powerful little shots of beauty and calm that heal communities. Like in acupuncture, halos create connections, but between human beings, leaving legacies of commemoration and friendship. As a matter of course and principle, we actively seek to create relationships and partnerships with organisations that share our ethos. Next slide, please.
We were asked as part of the presentation to respond more widely to the question of how to bring more nature into our cities. Halo Gardens are easy to deliver and inexpensive, but they're only part of the solution. What they can be is a real catalyst to demonstrate the power of well-designed green space to deliver on social and ecological needs. However, such projects are just tools. They enable the bigger dialogue to happen around proper investment into good public spaces. Public space and green space in particular are not accessible by all people, and health inequities and nature deficit go hand in hand with poverty. Halos can help shift this pattern, but only as a small element of bigger, more structural strategies.
Well, what's next for ERTS and for Halo? We have just this week had funding confirmed for further halos on the NHS estate in Glasgow and in the north of England, and we look forward to rolling the project out across the UK and beyond. We also have had interest from housing associations, a national charity supporting children in care, and local community groups. And as a direct result of the nature-based accelerator, we are working with the conservation volunteers on the Riverside Activation project, funded by Glasgow City Council to bring life to dead space along the banks of the River Clyde.
We're hoping to build on the Halo experience and bring other replicable landscape elements to the market. Projects such as Gym Wall, which is shown here, and outdoor classroom kits are in development at the office as further tools for urban acupuncture, hopefully stimulating a bigger debate around these issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elle and Felicity. This is a truly beautiful example of a nature-based recovery, and I wish you best of luck of bringing it to communities across the UK and maybe beyond as well. Now I have a great pleasure to invite to the stage EU Climate Pact Ambassador, social entrepreneur and founder of Social Climate, Jesus Iglesias. Jesus, please, the stage is yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Eva, Idris, Sean, and fellow co-organizers. Thank you also to the European Union delegation. This is Jesus Iglesias from Malaga, Spain. I work at a cooperative called the Social Climate, which facilitates social innovation for climate action. So contribution today revolves around two key levers to mainstream nature-based solutions in cities for climate action and biodiversity protection. And those are community engagement and social entrepreneurship. So we're going to illustrate both concepts with very concrete specific projects that we are undertaking at the moment. Next slide, please. So a sweet spot is at the intersection between nature-based solutions and local economies, as defined by IUCN and local futures, respectively. Because we firmly believe that nature-based solutions can boost local economies, led by small businesses, which generate very few emissions, and create quality green jobs in local communities, especially for vulnerable people. And the other way around, local economies contribute to caring for and maintaining nature-based solutions. Green areas in cities are the perfect example, as these are places where people gather, share, and enjoy nature, and thus is the perfect environment for local businesses to thrive as well. Next slide, please. So the first initiative that we're presenting here today in terms of community engagement is the Climate Journey. So what is the Climate Journey? It's basically guided tours across cities, but also rural landscapes on foot, by bike, or public transport to see on the ground the climate impacts that are already happening, the causes, meaning the sources of emissions of the local economy, the connections with other social challenges like inequalities, housing, migrations, you name it. And most importantly, we focus on local solutions, existing alternatives that people can join close to home. And at this point, we showcase nature-based solutions like green corridors, urban forests, urban gardens, localization projects like small food stores that source their produce from local farmers, But we also speak about arts and regenerative cultures, social movements for climate action, and even direct democracy schemes like citizen climate assemblies that are happening in some places in Europe and other places in the world at the moment. And at the end of the journey, we provide participants with a personal climate action plan, compiling all the projects and initiatives that we visited. And remember that this project is addressed to everybody, tourists, but also for residents, schools, universities, educational centers, young people in general, and professionals alike. Next slide, please. All right, so the second initiative we presented is Incuba Eco, a nature-based incubator. And this is inspired by Glasgow's NBS Accelerator, and my colleagues just presented before, and the Horizon 2020 Connecting Nature project. Essentially, this is a comprehensive online incubation program for nature-based enterprises, meaning social businesses that contribute to nature-based solutions. It is based on IUCN Global Standard for NBS and the principles of economic localization as well. It'll start in January with 2 editions, one for the entire Mediterranean region and another one for Spain. We use the NBS canvas to design the value proposition and the business model, and then we build a prototype, test it in the market, and launch it. We run this program in collaboration with a strong ecosystem of partners at all levels, including IUCN, Local Futures, ProMalaga, BioSul, and Connecting Nature. Next slide, please. Although this is an online program here in Malaga, Spain, we're going to complement it with a series of physical activities, including a training on nature-based solutions, a day of sustainable Mediterranean entrepreneurship around marine challenges and opportunities, a day on youth entrepreneurship to empower young people, a day on rural entrepreneurship on art to bring together rural change makers and artists and foster cross-sector creativity. And lastly, on launch day, we'll have an NBS Impact Investment Forum to really invest back in nature and boost the nature-based recovery that we so badly need. Next slide, please. So COP26, this is the time, let's do this. Thank you so much.
Jesus, thank you so much. And I am personally very inspired to start a free NBS walking tour in my city. And I'm sure I'm not the only one listening who thinks that. So thank you so much. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome the environmental officer in the Green Areas and Environmental Department of the Granollers City Council, and my colleague in the Interlace project, Xavier Romero. Xavi, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Eva. Hello. On behalf of the City of Granollers and Interlace project, it's a privilege to be here present you about our approach about nature and cities. Next slide, please. The traditional city governance doesn't sufficiently promote nature in cities, and nowadays we are living in cities with worrying social environmental problems, which have caused the greatest disconnection ever seen of people from nature. The Interlace project proposes a new multidimensional approach of urban nature and following the model nature places people. My city, Granollers, is located in Barcelona, in Spain, and is one of the 6 Interlace pilot cities which are implementing this new approach. And today, I will serve my city, Granollers, as a reference example to introduce you a little bit this new approach. Next slide, please. The core element of this model is nature restoration, because the revitalization programs to recover degraded ecosystems and new green areas are really important. And we are doing that in Granollers. And long time ago, the industrial and demographic expansion of the city highly affected the river area. Then the City Council need to launch a major environmental process to restore the river habitat and also to rehabilitate 2 other natural areas. One of them was the rural area, which is now well preserved and revitalized to produce local food for our street markets. And the other one was the restoration of a peri-urban forest, which included the construction of a wetland for biodiversity and also to establish a green economy based on water reuse. Next, please. For us, is any nature restoration initiative needs to go hand in hand with the recovery of social use in order to cultivate shared places for well-being and also exchanges between populations. We are implementing that in our cities, but we also preserve exclusively the riverbed for biodiversity because it has finally become a natural 2000 site. But as nature is for people, riverbanks and fluvial parks currently are a social corridor between the city center and recovered degraded natural areas. So this environmental and social successful project has contributed to replicate the same implemented model in other city areas and soon in the city center. Next, please. Because we need to go beyond the restoration of degraded natural environments or rewilding city gardens, and we have the necessity to bring more nature in the streets of our urban areas with the aim of creating more green infrastructure, improving the spirit community and enhancing the population health, particularly for those citizens with less access to the outdoor spaces. In the city center of Granollers, we are working on connecting the river with fluvial parks and also two neighborhoods where we will create two green super blocks. And this future project will incorporate a participatory process to co-design and co-implement this proposal. Next, please. And finally, we think that the involvement and engagement of citizens plays a remarkable an important role in the whole nature places people approach. We are implementing that through City Store Nature, which is a local forum to exchange how we implement nature-based solutions in Granollers. And in the coming years, Interlace project will strengthen the interconnection of our local forum with other similar forums about nature and cities at the European and Latin American level to finally make a global exchange to empower our commitment to renaturing cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Xavi. This was truly an inspiring example of how you're working together with nature, people and places to create a thriving and healthy community. So thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, in this presentation segment, we have with us Idris Kathada, who represents the Sustainable Development Committee of the International Federation of Consulting Engineers. Idris, please take the stage.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to all who have been involved in this initiative. And yes, to begin, just to remind that FIDIC represents national member associations in the world. So it's more or less 100 countries, and also at regional levels, there are some associations. And for example, in Europe, it's EFCA, the European Federation of Consulting Association. And having said that, also I have to mention that FIDIC and more specifically the Sustainable Development Committee, FIDIC support several initiatives, and more particular way, the GABC, the Global Alliance for Building and Construction. So next slide, please. Yes, to introduce the topic, firstly, I would like to remind that the name the nature-based solutions for buildings or for the urban environment have also relations with upstream and downstream nature-based solutions. And in this picture, which is provided by a UCN report, which was released last year, it shows that when we design a project, we have to, as much as possible, to take care about what is happening upstream and what is happening downstream. And next slide, please. And my presentation will be more focused on the topic of buildings, and more specifically the topic of climate mitigation and adaptation for buildings, because currently, as we already experienced, there is some heat waves during the summer. And just to give overview of what happens, for example, in this picture for the Paris city, there is a study which showed that when the potential of nature-based solutions like vegetation and trees is mobilized, it is possible to cool the city from 1 to 1.5 degrees during the night, and during the day it can be different scales, but it's also important. And if we look at the mitigation side, we have to also notice that when it's 1 degree less, the energy load to cool the buildings is lower. So it means that if all the potentials of vegetation and trees is mobilized, in some cases, for example, in this study, they show that it is possible to save up to 20% of the energy load. So it's something which is interesting when we think about the decarbonization roadmap, or when we speak about the energy efficiency. Next slide, please. And now what I would like to do is to just give an example of a project with 3 main steps. So the first step is to assess the situation of the land where the project will be implemented. So it's for housing, for example, or for buildings who may have mixed functionalities. And in this case, it is important to make some technical studies as well as biodiversity and environmental studies. And for the biodiversity, for example, it could be biodiversity inventories or some other analyses which can be more specialized depending on the sensibility of the site. Next slide, please. To say it very quickly, when the project is designed, it is important to introduce, of course, all the potential of vegetation and trees, and also to take care about what will happen during the project, meaning that if there is already, for example, some trees, it is important to protect the existing trees or to protect the existing spaces. Next slide, please. Here you have two kinds of projects, for example, if we just look the one which is on the left, there is a building which is going to be set up, and there are already two trees. Next slide, please. And in the end, you can see the building at the center of this picture, of this slide, where the buildings have been protected, and they provide still their services, of course, of cooling, of quality, for the air quality, but also for the improvement of the life quality and the landscape perspective it offers. Next slide, please. And to finish, as we have very short time, just to say that one of the challenges is to mainstream these topics, because actually, for example, to make biodiversity inventories, or to make to design some ecological solutions which are compliant with local spaces, for example, it needs a lot of knowledge, and I think that this knowledge is improving, so we have to accompany, to support this improvement. So just to mention that here you have 2 examples of the way to mainstream. One is linked to one report which has been released by the GIBC, and next week on Monday they will release a charter, a statement about how to support the adaptation of buildings in the cities. And in this charter, the principle 6 is related to nature-based solutions integration. And the other example is a national enterprises process to recognize the efforts of for biodiversity. I won't go in a deep explanation, but just to show that there are some approaches which can be used to support the mainstreaming of the NBS in the construction sector. Thank you, and over to you, Ewa.
Thank you very much, Idris. And indeed, it's a truly very important work to bring those concepts and mainstream them among the engineering professionals. So thank you for the great work you and your organization are doing. I regret that we do not have time for the answer and questions session with our presenters, but I do invite you to connect with them directly through the events platform through which you're watching it. You can connect and ask your questions directly to them. And now I will hand over to Tom Wild of University of Sheffield, the principal investigator of the Connexus Horizon 2020 project, who will moderate the panel discussion. During the panel discussion, you can ask the questions to the panelists using the Slido functionality that you can see in the bottom left corner of the event platform. And without further ado, over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Eva, and good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to our short panel session on opportunities, challenges, and pathways to mainstream nature-based solutions as part of COP26. I'm based in the University of Sheffield's Department of Landscape Architecture, and as Eva mentioned, leading the Horizon 2020 Connexus project. It's my pleasure and privilege to host this debate, and as ever, we don't have long, so I'll ask each speaker to keep their answers short and focused to a few minutes. It's great to be back in Glasgow, having started my career in earnest here in the late 90s as an environment protection officer working on river pollution and habitat restoration. I've always had a strong interest in urban environments, but working here in the city, and particularly its east end rivers of the Tolcross Burn, the Mollendina and the Camlaki Burn, really switched me on to the challenges around urban water management, environmental justice and flooding. Supporting citizens through their difficulties with sewage flooding and their need for green spaces really set the scene for my later work on sustainable drainage, daylighting of river culverts and urban green infrastructure. So the work of this great city and its wonderful people still frames the way I think about urban nature and also the solutions we're delivering in the Connexus project here in Europe and in Latin America, with over 30 partners spanning 7 cities, governments, businesses, NGOs, and some of the world leading researchers in nature-based solutions. So we have 4 great panelists today who I'll introduce in turn with a relevant question. And it's appropriate that our first speaker today comes from another dense and vibrant city, intimately linked with its river catchment. Without further ado then, I'd like to introduce Secretary Carolina Urrutia. Carolina is Bogota's Secretary for the Environment. She's a political scientist from the Iberoamericano University of Mexico and holds a master's degree in public policy from Harvard School of Government. Carolina has served as director of the organization Parks Como Vamos and the newspaper Semana Sustainable. She's also a consultant for the work. She's also been a consultant for the World Bank, Deputy Director of Sustainable Development of the National Planning Department, and advisor to the Ministry of Defence. Carolina has more than 20 years of experience working on environmental issues. So, Secretary Urrutia, buenas tardes. I'd like to start by asking you, in Bogota, what's the approach you're taking to unite different agencies and policies? What's the governance setup driving the use of multifunctional nature-based solutions? And in particular, what was the process used to promote cross-sectoral work?
Thank you so much, Tom. And I want to take the opportunity to thank Glasgow. I'm here since Sunday, and it's been really fantastic. I got a little late today because there are protests in Glasgow, but I have to say that they're very well managed, and I was able to hear all the presentations. So, Tom, I think the approach we're taking, and we have taken over the past 2 years, and this will be the approach that we hope will stay in Bogota's government throughout, but will definitely be the way we're governing over the next 2 years as well. What we see is, in terms of integrating nature in the city, we have 3 main challenges. The first is you messed up the Iberoamericana, and I can't say redistributing space to give more space to nature, and of course more space to people, to pedestrians, and to bikes, and a little less space to fossil fuel and cars. But especially in terms of making more space for nature, we really have a big challenge in terms of acquiring the land that we want to protect. We have many protected areas in Bogota, but we haven't completed the task of purchasing them or acquiring some way to make sure that we can fully protect them. The second one once we have access to the land, is to make sure that we intervene it in the correct manner. Whether it's full-scale restoration, whether it's just planting or gardening, such as the Halo project that we just heard about a few minutes ago, we have to make sure that the way we intervene is the correct way to keep communities connected to the nature that the city is offering. And I think the third challenge, which is probably an even more challenging one, at least in the Latin American context, is nature-based solutions, not only in terms of making more space for nature and making sure that that nature is appropriate for the city and for biodiversity, but also having NBS alternatives to gray infrastructure, which is really hard when you think about it from the perspective of public contracting. Nature-based solutions tend to take a lot longer, even if they're not as expensive, than big infrastructure projects involving a lot of concrete. So I'd say that proving that it's worth it, even if it takes a little longer, is one of the biggest challenges we have in terms of convincing our citizens and our voters that these investments are a good idea. How are we going about the multi-sectoral approach? So first of all, the Environment Secretariat is not the only one involved in taking care of our protected areas. So with our water utilities company, with our Parks and Recreation Institute, we're all working together to make sure that we find the space, that we identify both protected areas, that we build the right parks, and we resignify recreation to make sure that it also includes nature, not only thinking of parks in terms of swings or green space, but also just wild areas for our biodiversity. And which tools do we have? We've built a climate action plan that, of course, prioritizes nature, an air quality plan that also prioritizes interventions that include greening the city. We want to create a new entity to administrate our natural protected areas. And the main tool that we have is the land use plan, our master land use plan that we are proposing to the city and that should be approved by the end of the year, which increases protected areas or with some form of protection by up to 30% and proposes one very interesting intervention in terms of being the capital of one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, which is ecosystemic connectors. We don't want to have only protected areas, but we want to make sure that they stay systemically connected amongst each other. So we have to intervene public gardens and sidewalks, every single green space we have in the city to make sure that we increase biodiversity.
Thank you, Carolina, and it's a great pleasure to be working together with you in Connexus. Next, it's highly appropriate at this UN-organised conference to hear from a leader of its work on cities. It's my pleasure to introduce Martina Otto. And Martina is head of the UN Environment Programme City Unit and also Secretariat to its Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. She has over 20 years of experience in environmental policy and programme management, with a particular focus on energy and transport. In her 16 years with UNEP, Martina served in different functions based in Paris and Nairobi. Before joining UNEP, Martina worked on trade and economic instruments for environmental protection with the UN Conference on Trade and Development. She also worked with the European Commission. And Martina is a fully qualified lawyer, having trained in London and Frankfurt, specialising in environment and having worked with major law firms on due diligence. Martina, please can you tell us, where are we now with biodiversity in the construction and building sectors, and particularly what are the challenges and ways forward in applying new knowledge and practices to include nature in planning and development projects?
Thanks very much, Tom, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you in this super interesting panel. And obviously, it's a topic that's very close to our heart. So you've asked, where do we stand? And we've seen examples around the world picking up from vegetated roofs and walls to rain gardens to trees. So connecting the building with the city, with what I call the city's an ecosystem as well. And we see a real recognition of those multiple benefits. This is coming up very much. So not only looking at the whole equation from an adaptation angle, this is a bit more established already, but also increasingly from a mitigation angle, looking at reduction of urban heat islands, reduction of cooling needs in buildings, and thereby also providing a means to having less recourse to energy demanding mechanical cooling, for example, but also to bring nature back into cities. And that came out already very strongly in this panel. And we do have stunning examples, really stunningly beautiful examples as well. And I think we should emphasize that. For example, the Bosco Verticale, the vertical forest in Milan, and this helps to create more interest thanks to the beauty as well. It demonstrates the role of architects, the investors, to do these demonstration projects of what can be done, but also to create this heritage of tomorrow. And having said all that, nature-based solutions in buildings is still pretty much a niche market, and we need to see how we get things to scale. And we have identified a number of barriers, and they're not unlike some of the barriers in the wider city space for nature-based solutions as well. And I want to emphasize four. And the first is the lack of sufficient quantification of benefits, and linked to this, the lack of nature accounting that really valorizes nature assets, as is done with the gray infrastructure. And here, one thing is really the fact that it's multi-benefit is actually meaning that it's almost falling through the cracks, because it does good, or the nature-based solutions do good on so many different fronts, and thereby not being the main measure for addressing one particular problem. And then obviously, and we heard that already a little bit from Idris as well, that the nature-based solutions are so highly context specific that it makes it a little more difficult to grasp yet. So it's not cookie cut. The next is about the business models and finance. And although we do have some examples of innovative setups that do help overcome what we call the wrong pocket problem, so the ones who actually benefit most are not the ones who have to pay upfront the cost often enough. And then the probably too lengthy payback times for some of the green features appearing. And then the third element is around multi-level governance. We heard quite a bit of examples from city-level action, which is fantastic, and this leadership is super important to go forward. But sometimes cities are limited and in what they can do, and are dependent very much on this very good interaction with the central governments. And I'm looking at building codes, and obviously that's very different in different places as well, who has the primary authority over them. But then in the end, it's the cities in charge of helping with the implementation, that for sure. And here we have not seen sufficient reference in the building codes to nature-based solutions as well, making space for that. And the last point that I wanted to emphasize is the training of the workforce to make sure that the implementation is falling into place as well. And here we really have to work on the full value chain, so from the architects all the way to the builders. And I mentioned that there are examples of how things can shift already, and that's on the policy and the incentives space. And we have standards that we have seen have been put into place. Toronto as an example. We have incentive schemes as we know them from Singapore. We're setting up a special fund linked to a gold standard for bringing nature-based solutions in. Also, the opportunity to look at the green plot ratio and so on. So what it takes is more advocacy to make sure that nature-based solutions are part of mainstream, further demonstration, and in terms of scale, the policies and the incentives, and making sure that the investors and financiers sort of overcome maybe a little bit of mistrust with something that's new. Over from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina. It's great to hear your perspective. Let's now turn to Chantal van Ham from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which has long been a proponent of nature-based solutions. Chantal is acting director of the European Regional Office of IUCN. She heads up its programme on nature-based solutions and biodiversity projects, which help policymakers, cities, businesses and governments to develop NBS for a range of societal challenges, mobilising the Union's knowledge and its best practices. Before joining IUCN, Chantal worked as a finance specialist with PwC in the Netherlands. She has a degree in international business and an MSc in forest and nature conservation. Chantal, you've been working on nature-based solutions for some years now. Please, can you tell us from IUCN's standpoint, what are the next steps to engage SMEs and civil society? How can they cooperate with municipalities to mainstream nature-based policies? And I'd be really interested to hear your views on how the challenges such as inclusion and participation differ across regions and socio-political contexts. Chantal.
Thanks a lot, Tom, and thanks to the organizers of this event, which I think is incredibly inspiring. And we heard already a lot of interesting ideas and also actions that work in practice when it is about how we bring nature-based solutions into that urban fabric and respond to that climate and biodiversity challenge that many of us have highlighted during this COP and beyond. So for IUCN, the concept of nature-based solutions, as you said, has been key in our developments over the past years, also with a standard that we launched to help investors, but also practitioners, landscape managers, to make nature really part of the equation. But as you asked me about what are the challenges at this moment, of course, I think it was already highlighted a few times. We face these impacts more and more, in particular in our urban world. And when it comes to our world natural heritage, IUCN's World Heritage Outlook 3 report shows that 32% of our 252 natural world heritage sites around the world are threatened by climate change. At the same time, we know that 30% of climate change mitigation can be provided by nature, while only 3% of climate financing is currently directed towards nature-based solutions. The UNEP State of Finance for Nature report from this year shows that we need to triple at least this investment by 2030 and increase it fourfold by 2050 if we want to achieve that mission. And that brings me, of course, to the key stakeholders in that whole process. Of course, cities are for IUCN a major partner in this, as they are the closest to our citizens who, first of all, have to see the value of nature, and of course, the investment, the business community, who has a strong role to play in integrating nature-based solutions, for example, as was mentioned by Martina, in the building codes and in the way we use our raw materials, but also in our wider landscapes and in strengthening the connection between cities and the wider ecosystems, because I think, as we all see, the real mission of this century is to restore our natural ecosystems, as these are at the point of collapse, as we all know. So, of course, the risks that we see in relation to nature are very unequally divided. Climate change is unfair. It impacts some communities much more than it does affect others. And a recent report of the World Bank shows that this collapse of ecosystem services would cost, for example, 2.3% of our global GDP in 2030, but sub-Saharan Africa would lose, for example, almost 10% of its GDP, and South Asia 6.5% of its GDP if those ecosystem services indeed will disappear. And we know, of course, how degraded our urban ecosystems are. So at the same time, nature, and there are many positive examples, as we know, of the Horizon Europe demonstration projects, Horizon 2020 projects, but also many others from our international partners that show there are ways to restore that connection and to also deliver climate actions that are inclusive and equitable, and that bring in that voice of communities. And I think what is a real interesting example is what we know as these participatory budgeting processes. Many cities have been doing that over the years, and it means that citizens really have a voice in deciding on which types of actions, but also how they're managed in cities. So, for example, New York has now allocated $210 million to more than 700 community designed projects to improve improve these local services related to climate change, but also cities in Poland, in Belgium, where I'm based, in Germany, and other parts of the world have experimented with these participatory processes. And in this way, we can capture the knowledge and the skills and the capacities of the local people across society, and also giving them the chance to play a role in their future protection. Maybe just to conclude, IUCN has held its IUCN World Congress in September in Marseille, bringing together its members and partners, looking at the future plans for action to ensure the sustainability of the planet. And as part of the outcomes of that Congress, which you can find in the Marseille Manifesto, a key role is given to empowering people as agents of change. And there's some key factors there that I wanted to highlight, which is, of course, that we respect and harness the voice of all these actors, including youth, women, indigenous and local communities, frontline workers like rangers. And at this moment, IUCN has a special membership category created for indigenous people, but also since our last Congress for cities and subnational governments, which for us is a way to really strengthen that joint action. At the same time, I think as we all focus on in our day-to-day work is this cooperation and partnerships across levels, disciplines and sectors. And that is also very much linked to the work that IUCN does with the private sector, where we look for joint solutions that don't come easy, but in the end, may bring those benefits that we're looking for, and the restoration of our systems. And
Chantal, I'm going to have to ask you to stop if that's okay. I'm sorry.
My last sentence, most of all, recognizing local action as a powerful tool for change. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Chantal. So let's bring things back to Glasgow now with Kit England. Kit is Glasgow City Council's Green Economy Manager, where he leads the development of the Green Deal for Systemic Transformation. Prior to this, Kit was Climate Resilience Business Manager for the sustainability charity Sniffer, where he managed the Climate Ready Clyde partnership. Part of his role was to develop the Glasgow City Region Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan. And Kit's also worked with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Newcastle Council on climate action. He's a climate kick champion and contributor to the UK's climate change risk assessment. Kit, based on your experiences in connecting nature and your work in Glasgow, what are your recommendations to local and regional governments seeking to actively engage private actors in implementing nature-based solutions? And how can we enterprising businesses be supported? What's your advice to the new players?
Thanks, Tom, and fantastic to be here, and thank you for having me along. I think it's a really, really interesting time. The context for where we are now. If anyone's been watching the kind of discussion of the coverage of COP, we're at the start of what is a decisive decade where emissions have to halve globally by 2030. So the kind of, I suppose, the context for where we've been thinking about in Glasgow is both kind of through the Horizon 2020 program and through kind of, I suppose, the wider policy process we've been going through. We've been at that stage, that early stage of piloting and demonstration for a couple of years. I think where we need to go now is how do we move, rather than looking at incremental change in terms of, gradually scaling up the number of organizations and institutions and businesses kind of deploying nature-based solutions or growing businesses that work in nature-based solutions. What we've got to do is, as cities and as regions now, is think about how do we pull all the multiple levers of change which allow us to go from that incremental slow support that we've done through Horizon and through things like our planning policy to that exponential change. Because growing we have to kind of mainstream across the whole of the economy has to be green, and we have to substantially grow our green economy, the businesses which provide the goods and services which will allow that transition to happen. So, early on, we kind of have used Horizon 2020 to innovate and experiment. What we're trying to, and we've started to embed in our policies and plans, as I say, that need for nature-based solutions. I think, I've arrived at the council as the Green Economy Manager for the last sort of four or 5 months, and what we've been thinking about is how do we get that much more robust and mature approach to our whole green economy. And I suppose there's a number of different things there. So the first is, you touched very briefly on our Glasgow Green Deal, actually what we're starting to do is not see climate action as separate from economic action anymore. Actually, one of the things that it's clear, emissions and climate risk stem from the structure of our economic model, and therefore, on the one hand, that's a challenge, but actually if you start to solve those different pieces of the economic model, then actually it leads you down the road of trying to deal with that climate risk and those emissions as well. So trying to get to the point where institutionally we don't treat those things as separate is our first point, thinking about the governance structures and the ways of working, and no longer kind of just having an economic development team that thinks about what the economy looks like over here and a sustainability team over there that thinks about kind of what kind of climate risk is. The second is then actually starting to push that into different policies and plans. So, for example, our regional economic strategy puts climate action, has one of the big transformational opportunities we see is around climate action, thinking about supporting businesses, developing green businesses. The second is around systems innovation, and actually we're doing a number of pieces of work with organizations like EIT Climate Kick, thinking about how do you innovate to increase the amount of nature-based solutions. So we've been doing work looking at wood in construction, for example, and looking across all of the value chain and thinking about what are the levers that we, in partnership with Scottish Government and regional government, have to accelerate the amount of carbon storage through wood in construction, for example. And then the last point I would say is that we've been creating some of those wider enabling conditions, things like our green investment prospectus, where we're looking for an £18 million investment for nature-based solutions in things like the Clyde Climate Forest, and fostering a process which allows us to connect private sector investment with local business cases here, and using the work underway in capital markets around greening with green finance taxonomies, etc., to allow us to scale up some of those finance. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to stop there, but that's a very, very short overview of some of the very big and transformational things that are just getting underway in Glasgow, and I hope that's okay.
Wonderful, Kit. Thank you very much. I mean, you kept to time, and I'm going to pick up one of the questions that's come from the audience straight away with yourself, if that's okay, which is that someone's asked, has there been significant pairing of nature-based solutions with digital solutions to address the environmental threats in cities? Is there scope for that? I'll ask you that first, Kit, and then we'll pick up later with others.
So it's something that's actually just starting to happen at the moment. We're doing a project with an organization called Dark Matter Labs called Trees AI, which is looking at trees as infrastructure, and it's trying to think about, can we use digital platforms to start to create markets, and services around nature-based solutions? I will be the first person to say I'm not familiar with all of the detail of that program, but I think you're absolutely right. Thinking about the digital solutions and linking them with other sectors, and that cross-fertilization is going to be really important. I mean, another really good example of that is Earth observation and satellite data, right? Where actually one of the biggest challenges has been, things like tree canopy cover, and actually helping cities map their existing assets around, and their functions, right? And actually we're getting to the point now where we're using Earth observation data to understand our tree canopy cover and prioritize interventions, pair it with data around, social demographics to help us think about the equity issues associated with, who has access to nature-based solutions and not, along with things like climate risk and carbon storage potential, and better quantify what we have as a city, but also to identify, where those opportunities and where those business development opportunities are, to be quite frank. Where in Glasgow, for example, should you be looking to try and help businesses to deploy nature-based solutions, whether it's because it helps create business value, whether it's because it protects them from climate risk, all those kinds of things as well.
Okay. Can I just bring in Martina just quickly at the end, because I think she had a point here to add to that.
Thanks very much. No, I mean, I just put it in in the interest of time, I'll put it in the chat. What we've seen is quite a bit of pickup of digital solutions for tracking, so that it's not only about we plant a tree, but we want to make sure that it's around there for a time to come. So looking at the impacts as well, and it is a means to involve communities at the same time. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to hand back to Sandra to wrap up for us all today. We did have a question about what would you do if you had unlimited power for the day, but let's all just maybe hope for today that we make some really good progress in what's left of the COP. So I'll hand over to Sandra to wind us up. And
thanks. You put me on a quiet challenge at 1 minute, Tom, so I think you have to pay me back by a beer to make this up. So thanks a lot. I was really inspired by all the presentations from the different speakers we had here in the panel today. And we saw a lot of progress has been made already. And there are still a lot of challenges to have this incremental change that has been outlined in planning and policy making. Thinking just my 3 takeaway messages are: let people experience nature impacts, thinking about the halo, tiny green spaces, which can trigger larger discussions. But also do climate and nature journeys that we heard about, so that people really know what can be the impact, how can it contribute. Second, let's think, we need to think systemic, thinking along the value chain, upstream and downstream, thinking climate biodiversity together, have this joint planning, working across the departments, and have connectors between ecosystems. And the last, quite important, is invest now. So we know nature investment, it's not financing the benefits and the potential of nature-based solutions. So we need a clear statement from the local to the international level in financing and contributions using green and nature-based economy. So on behalf of the entire organization team, I would like to thank all for the people who attended the session and the speakers and panelists. Please visit the projects that you can here see on the screen. And if you want, engage with them in the processes, events, reach out. I think there's a lot to share. So do not hesitate, do not wait to do that. And with that, I wish you all a good day. And I hope you will share the insights with your colleagues, but maybe also with your neighbors and your friends and your family, so that we all can make a contribution to bring more nature to cities and our lives, responding to the climate and biodiversity crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much.